snow was coming hard from the north, fine as ground glass and noiseless as breath. Tormund Giantsbane squinted into it until his eyes watered and his beard froze into a white fletching that pricked at his cheek. The world ahead was pale and shifting, a drift of ghosts moving across the face of the true north. He leaned his weight to the wind, the haft of his axe in his gloved fist, and went on through the pines. Men said the trees here were older than kings and the wall put together. He believed that. The trunks ran up like pillars, massive as towers, and their snow-laden boughs pitched and sighed as if they were thinking. Tormund listened the way a hunter listens when the forest decides whether to show its teeth. He heard the creak of ice on bark, the hush of powder sliding down a slope, a raven's single crack of a call, but nothing else. The others had left their silence behind long after their white shadows went back to wherever they crawled from. The silence nested in places, waiting. Grit, he muttered to himself, naming the wind as old men did when they were alone. You bite sharp today. His breath smoked out and blew back into his face. He wiped the rime from his mustache with a thumb and spat. The gob hardened before it struck the ground. He laughed at that and at himself, because the laugh drove the cold back from his heart. A man who forgot the use of laughter north of the wall forgot his hands and feet soon after. The track he followed was not a track in the Southron sense. It was a thought the land had, a remembering of the feet of elk and hunters and 100 ghosts. Even hidden, he knew it by the set of boulders like old knuckles, and by the way the trees bent toward a hollow where a creek slept beneath a lid of ice. He crossed that creek in 3 strides, pausing on the far bank long enough to look back at his trail. The wind had already made a liar of it. Good. He wanted to be alone with the tree. He found it in a bowl of the wood where the snow lay shallower and the ground sloped toward its roots, like men bending to a fire. The weirwood was not tall, not like the pines, but thick and gnarled, with a crown of bony branches that still wore leaves, blood-bright even beneath rime. Each leaf a tongue. The face cut into the trunk had crooked eyes. The sap had bled and hardened in the cold, a lace of red frozen tears. It looked half amused, half sorrowful, as if it had expected him. You're too pretty to be a man's face, Tormund told it, loud in the hush. But that's no fault of yours. He shoved his axe into the snow, knelt, and put his bare palm to the bark. The cold bit him deep, but there was something under the cold, a patient listening. He had never been a praying man. He had laughed at gods more often than not, and at men who clutched them like talismans. Old gods of tree and stone and the sneaking ones in the snow. He dealt with all of them in campfire tales and in the way his belly tightened when frost came too quickly. After the long night on the milk-white plains and the blue shadows that cut like knives, his laughter had hardened into a different sort of thing. He still mocked, but he had learned the quiet too. I won't ask the likes of you for permission, he said. That's for men who kneel, and my old knees have other work to do. But I'll say this to your bone-white face and to whatever sleeps under it. I mean to set a crown on the heads of a folk that hate crowns. I mean to tell a people with the wind for father and the snow for mother that they have a house now, and a hearth that won't go out when the next great cold comes. If I'm a fool, I've been a fool before. If I'm a liar, I'll have to live with the lie. But if I'm right, then there will be children who don't know the taste of fear like iron on the tongue. There will be daughters who learn to throw a spear for the joy of it, and not because something dead is walking in from the sea. And the tree watched him with its red, carved gaze. Sap gleamed in the scar of its mouth like a tongue that had said all the words there were. You won't answer, Tormund said. Good. I've heard enough talk to fill a mammoth's belly. I wanted to say it to someone who remembers. He pulled his hand away, flexed the ache out of his fingers, and rose. Around him the forest creaked and settled. He took up his axe and turned for the hollow's edge. The little bowl gathered cold like a miser gathers coins. As he climbed, each breath warmed by a hair. At the rim he paused, looking back once, and grinned at the tree, half in challenge, half in thanks. Then he went south along his thought of a path toward the camp, where smoke was already drawing up like a black braid into the wind. They had built their shelters in a curve against a low hill, so the blast from the frost fangs could not cut them open in the night. Snow had been shoveled into walls and tamped down with boots and the flat ends of axes. The hides hung thick and brown as old bread. Above the curve of huts and tents, a line of stakes stood under ice. Whalebone, mammoth rib, driftwood carried up from the coast, and from each stake a banner flapped. There were more banners than Tormund had seen in years that were not the banners of Southrons. Hard faces sewn in hide, eyes made of beads and hooks, a hand painted crimson, a bear in black charcoal, a tusked skull, the pale face of a Magnar done with a knife. They were as ugly and proud as the folk who had brought them. The camp smelled of smoke and seal fat, and men who had been cold too long. Voices carried, a woman's laughter, a child's yowl, men arguing over a piece of iron like crows, arguing over a strip of meat. In the center, a fire roared so hard its sparks shot into the wind before the snow drank them. Val found him there. He smelled her before he saw her. A clean, sharp scent that lived somewhere between pine bough and steel. She wore white furs that made his beard look dingy, and her hair was bound in a tail with a string of teeth. "You speak with trees now?" she asked, tilting her head toward the woods. "I told one a thing I meant to do," he said. "I didn't ask him to do it for me. Trees are deaf and men are stubborn. Between the two, I put my coin on the trees." "Where'd you get a coin?" Tormund asked, grinning. "Been keeping Southron habits again?" "I keep what works," Val said. "Men's ears don't open unless you pour something into them. If it isn't ale, it has to be words." "That's why I brought you," Tormund said. "You can pour both." Val's smile was the small, dangerous sort that meant she was pleased and would not say so. "I told the frozen shore men your tale," she said. "I told them about a crown that doesn't ask for kneeling. I told them about a kingdom that is a skin sewn from many hides. They asked me how much iron there was in such a skin." "Enough," said Tormund. "More if we stitch it right. They asked me who would be the bone of it." He shrugged. "Bone's a strong word. I'll be the man gets hit first when something comes from the snow." "That's a king's business," Val said. "Aye," said Tormund, when the word still means something. By the fire, children were throwing bones into a circle scratched on the hard-packed snow. They whooped when one of the pieces clattered just so. A boy with a sore on his lip looked up at Tormund and said, "Is it true you bedded a she-bear?" "Twice," Tormund said. "Once for practice, once for the story." The laughter warmed him as much as the flames. "Get your snot out of your nose, boy," he added not unkindly. "If you're going to besmirch your face, do it with blood or soup." The boy wiped his mouth on his sleeve and went scarlet. Val gave Tormund a look that said he would never be housebroken, and that was perhaps for the best. Men drifted closer, drawn by the prospect of his voice. There were Thens with their close-cropped hair and iron discipline, faces hard as tallow knives. There were hunters from the milk marsh with painted cheeks and ratskin caps, their bows wrapped tight. There were driftwood men with shoulders like barrels, smelling of salt and blubber, and slim spearwives with their arms bound in thongs to keep the cold from biting. He saw Yellowknife, a wiry raider with a scar down his face, and laughter itched into his wrinkles. He saw Asha Quickfoot, who'd once stolen the boots from his feet while he drank, and then gifted them back to him stuffed with wintergreen when the storm came. He saw kids. He saw too many kids. He waited until the shifting ring of them settled. He did not stand on anything. He did not need to be taller. The wind did men the favor of blowing behind him, so his words went forward. "I've been many things," Tormund said. "Son of a stubborn father, husband to better wives than I deserve, father to children who ran faster than I could catch them, and lit fires I could not put out. I've been a raider and a singer, a liar and a drinker, and a man who stood where the ground cracked under his feet and told his fear, 'You'll have to wait your turn.' I've been a friend to men who wore black and spoke soft lies and harder truths. I've seen a king sing his way to death. I've seen a girl die for a man who didn't deserve it, and for a people who didn't know they needed saving. I've seen white shadows, and I've seen men with slower shadows do worse things. I told a tree just now, I mean to make a kingdom from a people who think a kingdom is a kind of southern sickness. Menderal. He let the snow hiss and the fire talk for a breath. Here's what I don't intend, he said. I don't intend to put you in lines like sheep and count you. I don't intend to send men with sticks to take your food when my soup's thin. I don't intend to say you can't choose your own wife or husband or brothers of the spear. I don't intend to make a god out of myself or out of a chair. If you see me built into anything, let it be a bridge. Then bridges break, a then called, flat, curious, not yet scornful. Tormund said. So do men. But you can cross a river on a bridge. The river doesn't give a cock if you can swim. That won a few cracked laughs. It loosened faces that had been carved by hunger and ugly winters. What I do intend, he said, is that when the next cold comes, and it will, my grandchildren and yours don't wait on a lord's leave to get through a gate. I intend that when a man in the south wants to trade iron for furs or stone for meat, he doesn't need 10 men with bows to keep his lungs inside him while he does it. I intend that when the south has a war, and it will, and looks north to find someone else to die for their songs about honor, we have our own songs to sing and our own walls to stand on. Not just the big wall, the one the children built before your grandmother's grandmother had a name. Smaller ones, fire rings, places that don't move, that we can move around. I intend to make such a place and such places that a man can go out into the snow to piss without thinking of his daughter's face. Bah! A spearwife with amber beads said, That sounds like kneeling. It sounds like building, Tormund said. I don't ask for your knee. I ask for your hammer. And if you don't have a hammer, your hands. And if you don't have hands, your teeth. You can keep your pride, stitch it into the walls with the rest. Bendawanti. Val had told him once that words were like birds. You let them out of your mouth, and then you chase them if you like. He watched these words fly and waited to see where they landed. Some flapped dumbly and died. A few found perches in hard men's faces. Yellowknife spat. And who tells the then to share with the driftwood men when the walrus don't come up? Who tells the marsh folk to give me the iron they find in the mud? Who judges when I take a goat because my daughter's hungry? I do, Tormund said. He didn't raise his voice. And the woman beside me, and the Magnar who sits behind her with a face like a rock, and the old one who remembers when your father stole the goat last time and you called it bravery, and the boy with snot on his lip will have to live with what we decide. I'll call that a thing. We'll call that by the fire and by the weirwood and by the sea ice, 3 times a year and more when is needed. Those who don't come abide by the word of those who did. Those who don't come abide by the word of those who did. The then repeated, tasting it. Like the South's councils, like a lord's court, like a circle where a man throws his bones, and if they land wrong, he has to learn to throw better. Tormund said, jerking his chin at the children's game. Like what we've always done, but with a name and a time you can bite into. Yellowknife said, and when the South says this is raiding by another name, they'll say what they like. I mean to give them a word to say that once soured their teeth. He grinned at that. Treaty's the one. Pact is another. They like those. They like words cut into stone. Let them cut. I'll put my mark beside theirs. You know the Stark girls, some of you. You know the one with the eyes like winter. You know the other with the voice that goes through a room like a needle. They have men around them who remember they were small once and hungry. I know a black brother who can hardly say a sentence without telling you how miserable he is. And he means it. And for all that he's honest. There are men to speak to. There's a door to knock on, if we knock with a hand that looks like a hand, and not like a sword. Menetrand. Val's hand brushed his arm where his fur sleeve bulged. It was not a caress, it was a reminder. He drew breath. Before I go knocking, he said, I'll make sure I'm not bringing south a bag of angry cats. A kingdom is a big bag. It doesn't hold angry cats well. So here's what I ask first. Send your banners to the fist at the edge of the old river. 3 moons from now, when the wind leans south again. Bring hides and meat and iron scraps and old grievances. We'll set the first thing. We'll put a mark to a law that you can carry in your head. What's taken in hunger is paid back in work. What's taken in greed is paid back in pain. Blood for blood ends when the blood is a child's. Guest right holds even for men you hate. The dead are burned before the third night. The living who break these words are cast out and go south if they like. For I won't have them behind me when the cold goes hard again. And now, who keeps the law? Asked a woman with a baby wrapped tight against her breast. Those with the strength to do it, and the sense to know when to stop, Tormund said. I'll name men and women to stand between fights. Not to rule, to hold. We'll call them holdsmen, and if that sounds like a thing that sits, remember a hold can be a hand. If a holdsman grows fat on it, if he thinks it's a chair, we'll cut him out like a worm for meat. Bah! You speak neat, Yellowknife said, uneasy because he was half persuaded. I speak hungry, Tormund said, and raised his voice so the ring of faces heard what the fire heard. I want to see my sons and daughters old and loud. I want to see their sons fat and rude. I want to drink broth that wasn't stretched with snow melt. I want to stand on a wall I built myself and watch the northern lights and know there are eyes watching them with me. Not for fear, but because they're pretty. There. That's the crown I mean to make. I'll wear it if no one else will. I'd rather see it on all your heads. Men Nawar. They did not cheer. They were not Southron men in a yard being told about glory. They nodded or they scowled or they touched the beads in their hair and thought about it. That was better. Tormund felt their thinking like the weight of another cloak thrown across his shoulders. Heavy. Warm dight. Val stepped in. The frozen shore will come, she said. The thens will come. The Magnar behind her did not nod, but he did not say no, and among thens, that meant more than a slap on the back. The milk marsh will come, because they are tired of counting their children at night. The mountain men will come because they are tired of digging their dead out from under avalanches no man heard coming. The Ice River Raiders will come because even they would rather hit something that won't turn their bones to glass when it looks at them. And the Walrus men? Asked Yellowknife for the joy of being contrary. They'll come for soup, Tormund said. You always do when I make it. There was laughter then, the right kind. The kind that loosened the knots behind men's ears. The men drifted away to their meat and their knives and their beds. The kids went back to their bones. Yellowknife stayed a moment longer, still chewing on the gristle of it. 3 moons, he said. The fist. 3 moons, Tormund said. Bring your best lies. We'll need them. When the camp thinned, when the fire was no longer a crowd of eyes, Tormund sat on a log near the blaze and let his hands warm slow. Val sat beside him with the easy proprietary way of someone who had decided a space was hers and dared anyone to disagree. He peered into the heart of the flame until it lost its teeth and became a cradle's sooty glow in his mind. He could have fallen asleep there, upright like a bear in a wintering den. But he kept his eyes open. When you were the one men looked at, you stayed awake longer. Later, when the moon rose pale and flat as a coin, and the snow came slant and fine, he walked the line of huts to listen to the night. Snoring made a kind of peculiar music, and he knew whose it was. Asha Quickfoot sounded like a hare dreaming of wolves. Yellowknife sounded like a broken door. The driftwood men did not snore at all. They breathed like surf between rocks. A baby coughed with an ugly wetness. He made a note to send the woman broth thickened with marrow and spruce tips. He stopped under a hide roof when he heard a mutter and a scrape and a word hissed between teeth. Inside, a boy of 12, no more, was working at a shard of iron with a stone, scraping it down to something like a blade. The boy's hands were wrapped in cloth and bloody all the same. He had a strip of leather between his teeth against the pain. He looked up when Tormund pushed past the flap and tried to hide the iron. Badly. If you cut it down much more, Tormund said mildly, you'll have a pretty useless splinter. He took the shard without having to take it. He turned it. Where'd you find this? In a drift. The boy muttered. There was a black cloak under it. Then that shard remembers more of a man than you do. He squatted, which made his knees complain in an old, familiar voice. What's your name? Sigrun, the boy said, wary. You have a father? The question could be a knife. He asked it soft. Had. The boy said. He went out on the ice last moon. Didn't come back. And your mother? Had. The boy said again. He did not look at Tormund. She was taken by fever after the last march. Who gets to tell you when to sleep and when to keep scraping your hands bloody? The boy shrugged. Tormund held the shard toward the fire. I'll tell you something, Sigrun, since you've no one to do it. You can cut iron with stone until your fingers fall off, and you'll still have a bad knife. Or you can take what you have and go to a man with a hammer and a brain, and he'll beat this into something that will take an edge worth a lesson. I mean to have hammers. I mean to have a man whose work is beating iron into shapes, not beating his hands to blood against it. That's kneeling, call me a Southron lord. But when someone comes out of the white with blue eyes like a bad dream, I want the man beside you to have a knife that won't shatter because he sharpened it thin as a thought. Bender-o. Sigrun moved his mouth around without words in it. He took the leather out from between his teeth like a boy who had forgotten it was there. What will it cost? He asked finally. He was old enough to know that everything had a price. A day of your back, Tormund said. You'll haul wood until your arms ache. You'll make a wall out of snow the way a mason makes a wall from stone. You'll carry water, and you will not spill even when your hands are cold. You do that, and I'll take this to the hammer. You'll watch him beat it. You'll learn the song of it, and you'll keep your fingers. Sigrun nodded once. He was not grateful. Tormund did not want him grateful. He wanted him tired and sharp. By the time the last of the wood burned to red river stones and collapsed into ash, the moon had slid to the ragged teeth of the frost fangs. The cold had set in with a resolve he admired. He slept then, folded into furs, his axe laid along his arm like a lover, and he dreamed that he was walking for days under the skin of a great beast made of snow. Inside it, fires were lit and songs were sung, and he could hear the beast's heart, slow, stubborn, strong. They broke camp at first light that was not light at all, only a thinning of the dark. Runners who'd come in the night went back out with breath smoking and bells tied at their heels to keep their steps awake. Val sent 2 of her spearwives to the coast with a knot of driftwood men. The Magnar sent his nephew east with thin discipline like iron tucked in his bones. Tormund went south and west to the old river, because he wanted to see how the land lay and how the living lay along it. They reached the milkwater after 3 days of clean cold, and 1 day of dirty cold, when sleet fell in knives and then went dull in their hair. The river ran slow under ice, milky indeed where frost and slush churned. At a bend where old stones rose like the ribs of a long-dead thing, Tormund found a camp of cave folk. They had dug into the riverbank and warmed it with seal oil. 2 old men there had eyes that did not blink often enough, and a girl there had the look of a skin-kanger, though whether by truth or by diet he could not tell. They listened to him because Val was with him, and because he did not smile when he told them he meant to make something they could take their children into. When he had finished speaking, the old man with the fewest teeth said, "Will there be a place to bury our dead?" "They won't be buried," Tormund said. "I mean to burn them all." The girl's eyes narrowed. "That's for the poor," she said. "We put our dead in halls with stone benches and let their thoughts leak out into the rock. The rock can have the thoughts without the body stinking," Tormund said. "Burning's for those who learn the hard way what wakes when you go careless with death." The old men remembered. The girl felt the shape of the remembering when she tasted the air. They nodded in the end, slowly, and Tormund left behind a sack of salt and a length of mammoth hide, and took with him a promise that one of their banners would be at the fist when the moon had walked 3 times. At the fist of the first men, the wind always tasted of something old ground very fine. It raised the hair on his arms to stand there. The ring of stones still stood where the old ones had set them, and there were darker stains in the earth where men had bled in fear and defiance. Tormund walked the ring with his hand brushing each stone, and Val walked it with him. They did not speak. The wind spoke plenty. "Good a place as any," Tormund said after the 3rd circuit. He planted his axe head down in the snow at the ring's center. Around them, under the piled snow and the ground that remembered so many feet, there were stories wrapped and layered the way a mother wraps her child when a blizzard comes. He imagined unwrapping them with care and laying them in the sun like small clean bones. Men came. Banners came. The first were the thens, because they had decided to come, and so they came. In a line that did not stray. In cloaks that did not flap. Faces that did not flick. Their Magnar stood with his iron knife across his forearms and nodded once. The driftwood men came with noise. They were bad at quiet, except when their boats slid between floes with murder aboard. A day after that came the marsh folk with mud frozen into their hem, and a way of looking at him that weighed him as if he were a fishnet. The walrus men came last, faces peering out of ice-crusted beards like seals from holes in the floe. They always came last and were proud of it. They set fires in hollows around the ring. They stomped the snow into benches. They hung bones and beads and bells. They argued. Oh gods, how they argued. A woman from the white cliffs of the shivering sea shouted that no then would tell her child what coughed was too near to sleep, and a then replied that they would tell anyone who slept when it was time to stand. A man from the ice river grinned without humor and wanted to know whether he could still take a goat if the goat strayed. A driftwood man wanted to know what would keep the thens from taking his nets and calling it law. Tormund listened until his head rang and his beer turned to water. He said little. Val said more. The Magnar said almost nothing, and in that way said a great deal. "This is what it is," Tormund said at last, when voices had cracked and smoke had painted their throats. "We don't try to melt ourselves into one man's shape. We make a shape wide enough to hold our differences without breaking. We will not agree on everything. We'll agree on the few things that keep us from dying. Everything else we will fight about at a fire instead of in the snow." They wrote no marks. They had no maester to scratch at a parchment like a hen at a dung heap. They set names in mouths. They had 3 holdsmen to the fist. One then, one driftwood man, one spearwife from the marsh. Tormund set them by the ring and said, "You'll remember what we say better than any scratch on skin. If one of you forgets, the other 2 will remind. If 2 of you forget, I'll tell you a story about a bear and the smell of spring, and you'll feel foolish about forgetting anything so simple." That won him the laughter he wanted then, the laughter that said the thing had set, that it had become theirs enough to mock it. Mockery was the mortar of the free folk. They did nothing they couldn't laugh at, and they kept nothing they couldn't defend with a joke. The night after, the then holdsman came to him and said, "A kingdom without walls is wind." "The wind shapes the snow," Tormund said. "A kingdom without teeth is meat. The meat feeds the teeth." He thumped Harad's shoulder. "I hear you. We'll have walls and we'll have teeth. But the teeth will know which way the mouth is." Harad grunted. In then speech, that was as good as a poem. Word went south. It went in the mouths of men who had traded seal oil for iron, and found the weight of iron a warm comfort against the cold. It went with a driftwood man who'd once been a fish thief, and now carried a knotted rope of oaths about his wrist, and wanted to add another knot that bound him to something bigger than his own clever hands. It went with a black brother too, Ed Tollet, crowned in misery and humor, who looked at Tormund as if he could not quite believe that he was still alive, and then went down the wall to Eastwatch with a letter bound in wax stolen from a walrus jaw, and a story about a thing told humbly and well. Davos Seaworth arrived before the letter returned. He came with frost on his beard, and the look of a man who had come to love the North's cruelty the way a sailor loves the seas. He wore gray wool and a thick doublet and honesty, like an old scar. He stood at the fist with his hands out of his gloves to show he held nothing, and smiled like a man who knows how to talk to people who have nothing to sell but their pride. "Lord Tormund," Davos said, and smiled for the pleasure of watching the title sit ill. "Take that, Lord, and stuff it where the wind won't find it," Tormund said fondly. "You're the onion one, the one who says true things in rooms where men are trying hard to pretend they like lies." "I've been that man," Davos admitted. "I've paid for it more than once." His gaze went to Val, and he bowed a bow that was not courtly, but respectful. "Lady, don't pin me with the souse brooches," Val said. "You'll take them back with the skin." "I'll try not to be stuck by the pin," Davos said. "I came because my queen, my lady of Winterfell, has a taste for truth even when it sours her tongue. She heard things. She asked me to see if those things were true. She asked me to tell you that she is willing to listen for more than the length of a single breath. Memento. She's a small girl with a good jaw," Tormund said, pleased despite himself at the thought of the Stark girl whose eyes saw through lies as if they were bad seams. She has wolves in her blood. She does, Davos said softly. She also has men who would like her to be stupid. She does not oblige. Thine? He sat by their fire, and he ate their broth. And he listened while Tormund told him about the three holdsmen, and the burning of the dead, and the laws that were not laws so much as the names of old habits said loud. Davos asked questions like a man who had sold onions in poor alleys, and learned from women with babies on their hips what a promise is worth when the pot is almost empty. He asked who judged when a man said he'd stolen from hunger, and who decided what pain was owed to a greedy hand. He asked who would carry messages when the snow closed the world. He asked how a woman with no brother would be hurt at the thing, and what a man whose sons were all dead would owe, and what he would be owed. He asked what Tormund would do with those who came to his law with the South's habits clinging to them like leeches, the habit of peering down the nose, the habit of taking because one can. We throw them out, Tormund said. We throw them back over the wall. Davos' mouth twitched. I've thrown a few back over a figurative wall, he said. They tended to find the door again. Then we build the door smarter, Tormund said. Davos nodded. He warmed his hands and his old eyes, and he told them about Winterfell. He told them about a hall that had burned and been rebuilt, and about a godswood where a white tree grew with a face that no one would carve again. He told them that Sansa Stark did not intend to be queen. Not yet, if there was such a thing again to be. And that even so, she meant to hold the North for the North. He told them about men whose mouths died a little at the phrase, free folk, and men whose mouths went hungry at the phrase, trade. He said there were fields where wheat did not grow true. There were gaps where 100 men would have stood in other years. He said the North would take allies whose knees did not bend if it meant the wolves could sleep. Here's a thing that matters, Davos said at last. You set your thing at the fist, and you mean to set your fires where you will, and you will. But we need a stone. We need a mark. Something that says to those who work in marks that there is a line, and it is agreed. My lady would meet you at the wall. She would set her hand beside yours at a tree, if you like. She would do it under the eye of the old gods. She would call it a compact, because the North remembers that word. A compact is older than a treaty. It says cousins see one another. She would name your realm. She would call it what you call it. She would call you what you call yourself. I call myself Hungry, Tormund said. Hungry is a good king's name, Davos said. And his mouth creased in that way of his. Val's eyes had gone very intent. What would the compact say, Onion? That you may walk south of the wall, without being hunted, unless you take what is not yours. That you may trade at Eastwatch for iron and salt, and for what passes for wine in this frozen land. That no man of the North will take a free folk child from her mother and make a servant of her, and that any man who tries will find the North's teeth. That if Southron kings comes north with banners, your spears will stand in our line, and our spears will stand in yours, and we will not get into the habit of dying for each other, unless the habit saves our children. That there will be a mark on a map that the men who love maps can point at when they need to shut up other men. Them? What do you want in return? Val said. She was very still. Her stillness was the coiling of a cat. That you don't raid the Barrowlands because you're bored, Davos said. That you don't take a goat because it's not tied to a rock. That when a man of the North under my lady's protection comes to your fires with a pack and a wary smile, you feed him if he pays, and you don't stick him if he looks soft. That when you burn your dead, because I am hearing that you will, you burn them all, even if the old women remember a way with stones. Netting, the old women will call me a Southron's wife, Val said, amused, and without much care. They'll call you worse than that, Tormund said cheerfully. And they'll bring me broth when I cough for it. A compact, he added, rolling the word around like a stone in his mouth. Old word. Good taste. Your name for your land? Davos asked. What do you call it? Tormund looked north. The wind had carved the snow along the foot of the ring into long, subtle waves, as if a white sea had frozen in the act of moving. The true north, he said. Not the cold part. Not the empty part. The true part. The part that doesn't lie. Men will say it lies when it suits them, Davos said. And then the wind will come in their mouths and teach them the feel of honesty. Tormund thumped his fist in the air and then eased it down because his joints complained. We'll do it. Tell the wolf girl to bring her needle voice and her black maesters and their stones to scratch. We'll do it at the gate between us, where the old wall is a door when it wants to be. Oh no. Davos bowed his head. I'll take that to her. I'll tell her you're a man who knows how to hit a wall with a hand and not a sword. Tell her I'm a man who is tired of burying sons in the snow, Tormund said. Tell her I expect her to be tired too. Davos left the next day with the careful haste of a man who had learned that the shortest road between 2 points is between 2 honest words. Ed Tollett took him part way, muttering comfort to himself about all the ways he might die and how he had not yet achieved any of them. The camp at the Fist settled into a rhythm of waiting that was not idle. Walls of snow raised higher and packed harder. Firewood hauled, iron beaten into bars and then into hooks and points. Disputes heard and resolved with rough fairness. Children taught how to hold a spear that was more than a stick. Tormund watched Sigrun carry poles until his arms trembled, and then watched him stand at the hammerer's elbow to learn the song that turns iron into edge. The shard became a knife that could have shaved hair if any of them had thought that a good use for hair. Sigrun's face did not grow softer at that. It grew sharper, as if the knife had cut away some of the fog in him. One morning, the wind changed. It came from the south, smelling of something like smoke and something else like the memory of warmth. Tormund stood and sniffed it like a dog discovering an old path worn by paws and boots. Before noon, a horn sounded from a watch on the old ridge. Not many horns blew between their world and the wall, and this one had a note in it that made his mouth twitch. He went up among the rocks and the snow and stood where the watcher pointed. A line of riders came along the low bend of the land, their horses stepping careful on the crust. Wolves flew on white banners, simple and sure as teeth. There were other banners too. The merman of White Harbor, a pine with cones like fat fists, a bear, a flayed man with its skin stitched back on, which told him something about the North's way of making its old ugliness behave. He counted the riders without moving his lips. He measured the width of the line and the way it breathed. At their head rode a girl in gray and white and brown, her hair red as a weirwood leaf, where the sun caught it under the hood. She rode like someone who did not intend to fall, and who had learned what it meant to fall just the same. Beside her rode a big man with a soot-roughened face and a kind jaw, and an old man in maester's chains with their rags tied to keep them from freezing to his neck, and half a dozen other men who would not say much until it profited them. "There," Tormund said, and his voice felt good in his chest. "Let's go and see if the wolf knows how to smile without showing all her teeth." They met where the land dipped between the Fist and the long, low swell that led to the wall. The free folk came down from their fires like a weather, hard and swift, and the Northmen came up like a season, steady and inevitable. Val walked at Tormund's side, and the Magnar came behind them like a moving mountain. The girl on the horse reined in and looked down at them, with eyes that saw the whole of him in a single wash, and then began to see the parts. "Tormund Giantsbane," she said, and her voice was needle true. "I have heard stories about you since I was smaller than the sword I didn't know how to hold." "I've heard stories about you since you were smaller than the wolves that followed you," Tormund said. He bared his teeth in something that was not quite a grin. "I see you've grown into the wolves." "They've grown into me," Sansa Stark said, and there was something like laughter under it, something like iron, something like hunger. "You mean to be king?" "I mean to be louder than the wind when it counts," he said. "If you want a crown to look at while we talk, I can piss in the snow with the best of them. It's a good gold color when the day is bright." She did not smile at that, but the corners of her eyes softened, which was better. "I mean to see that the North has room to breathe without choking." She said, "If that makes me a queen, I will answer to it." They sat at a fire that half the North and half the true North could see and smell. The maester took out stones and chalk, and the habit of making marks that comforted him. Davos looked pleased with the world's ability to surprise him without killing him. Ed Tolet stared at the flames as if measuring how much of him they wanted and how soon they planned to take it. Val sat straight and calm and let her eyes go everywhere. The Magnar was a mountain that had learned to listen. "Say the words," Davos murmured. When the talking had burned through the first layer of smoke and fat, Sansa looked at Tormund. "Say what you want and what you will give," she said. "We will say what we want and what we will give. Then we will bargain as if we trade iron for furs on the coldest day of the year." "Menatorsi, Edim? I want the right to walk my land without your men calling it theirs," Tormund said. "I want the right to choose my holdsman. I want the right to take my dead to the fire without your whispers. I want to stand beside you if something comes from the south that wants to feed on the north. And I want you to stand beside me if something comes from the sea or the white that wants to feed on the true north. Nantor, I will give all that," Sansa said simply. And in the maester's hands a piece of chalk wrote the shape of it on a board, had brought because parchment stiffened and cracked. "I want an end to raiding without cause. I want a duty of trade, on certain days in certain places, under a known banner, so my men don't have to fear their wives' hunger. I want your men to take no child south of the wall, unless that child asks you to take them, and the mother says yes. I want your men who come south to remember guest, right as strongly as you remember your pride." "Then I will give all that," Tormund said. "The days and places will set in the thing, and will send you the names before the first snow of next winter. If a child goes south and the mother says nothing, I'll have the holdsman go to the camp and ask why. If the why is ugly, I'll fix the ugly. Maps," the maester croaked through his cloth. "Lines. Draw your line," Tormund said. "I'll check it with my feet." The maester drew the milk water with a hand that shook, but knew what it was doing. He marked the shivering sea with dots and the frost fangs with fatter dots. He drew a line that ran east of the fist to the sea and west up into the mountains where no man had ever put a line that stayed. Tormund watched, and Val watched, and the Magnar watched with a grunt when the chalk wandered toward rocks he knew by other names. Sansa watched the watching and said, "There," and moved the stone the width of a thumb. The line bent without breaking. In the end, they stood. There was no table to lay hands upon. There was the air and the snow and the old wind. They did it by the god style. Tormund cut his thumb with his own knife. Sansa bit the pad of her finger with teeth that had tasted many things and let a drop fall too. They pressed their blood together in the air over the chalk. The maester made a soft noise in his throat at the indecency and the rightness of it. Davos closed his eyes in a way that might have been prayer, and might have been a man savoring a taste he never expected to have again. "By snow and stone," Sansa Stark said. "By bone and fire," Tormund Giantsbane said. The wind took the words and pulled them apart and wove them into itself, the way it takes smoke and sleep. "Now," said Davos almost cheerfully, "we will need to tell men who do not want to be told." He was not wrong. There were free folk in the camps around the fist who heard line and looked for a thing to break. There were northern men who heard king and went white as church fat. There were holdsmen who heard duty of trade and counted how many carts they would have to drag through snow and how many bridges they would have to raise from ice. There were wolves who did not like the smell of walrus men. There were walrus men who did not like the way wolves looked at their children. There were thens who believed that law belonged to whoever could make his mouth close on it, the hardest, and there were marsh folk who believed law was a net that caught other men's hands before their own. Tormund did not bargain with them from a chair. He went from fire to fire until his boots sounded hollow with wear, and he slept on meat sacks, and woke with his neck stiff, and his beard clogged with smoke. He told the same story until he wanted to puke it, and then he told it again as if it were fresh caught. He ate bad soup and praised it. He took a knife out of a man's hand by offering him both his own and reminding him he had children. He let a woman shout at him until her voice broke because her sister had died on a South Ron pike 4 winters ago, and when she was done he gave her a place by the thing in a hammer to beat iron into shapes. He made jokes that were not cruel and laughed when men were cruel to him, because he understood that cruelty was a way the frightened asked to be shown where to put their fear. At Winterfell, Sansa faced men who thought the free folk were a story for frightening their children at night, and men who had buried brothers whose bones could still feel the bite of wildling arrows. She did not shout. She called a halt. She spread the chalk stone in front of them and set a cup at its edge, as if to say, "Drink this or go thirsty. The choice is yours." She let Wyman Manderley's nephew tell his tale of a driftwood man who had cheated him on a boat. She let Lady Mormont's cousin, hard and bright-eyed, speak his approval and his contempt. She listened with that needle-true stillness until the noise tied itself into a knot, and then she cut the knot, not with a sword, but with a word. "Children." When a lord looked as if he would talk about blood, she said, "Children." When a lord looked as if he would talk about honor, she said, "Children." When a man talked about old wrongs, she said, "Children then. Count them on your fingers. I will count them on mine. Will there be more or fewer if we do not do this?" Nanderwal. Fewer. Even in those stubborn mouths. The first caravan moved down from Eastwatch under the new banners when the snow turned a little to water at the edges of noon. It had sledges that groaned like old ships, and on the sledges were bars of iron, bags of salt, coils of rope, a barrel of oil that had come a long way from places where the sun was not a rumor. Men walked with it and beside it. Some wore furs cut strange, and some wore leather stitched neat. Some had scarred noses. Some had bright hair. Children walked too, wrapped and tied and put on the sledges when they cried until they smiled again. They went to the place the thing had named, a hollow near the fist where the bones of the ground made a crude stall. And they set a banner with a hand and a tusked skull sewn badly but loved. The walrus men sang a song that sounded like men helping one another lift a net full of fish. The thens did not sing. The driftwood men bellowed. The marsh folk haggled, as if they were cheating their own sisters at a game of stones, and then gave back what they had taken, with a joke that left no mark. A goat stood under a rope in the middle of everything, placid and chewing gum. The Ice River Raider, who looked as if he wanted to steal it, finally put his hands behind his back and went to look at knives instead. At night, Tormund sat with Valen and the Magnar and the Holdsman, and watched the long line of fires that marked the shape of something that had not been in the world yesterday. He felt old in his bones, and old in another way that did not exhaust him. He thought of the weirwood tree with the amused face. He wondered if, beneath the solid cold, the old root was bending. "Tomorrow," Val said softly. "Tomorrow we will have to pull teeth." "Aye," Tormund said, and he was almost merry. Teeth were made to be pulled. If they never come out, a man cannot show them. In the morning, a man with a shaved head and a necklace of teeth, some human, some not, came raging into the hollow with 30 behind him, faces painted with soot. He shouted about freedom and about kings and about Tormund's old stories made new and weak. He spat on the chalk stone and called it the South's curse. He waved a club bound with iron scraps. He had a name the woods used for wolves that would not run with the pack when the snows came. Rolf Harfine, son of no one willing to claim him. He had killed men for being in his way. He had killed boys for looking like sons of men he hated. He was a creature for a time when the wind was the only law. He had not heard the wind's new song. Tormund stood. The world narrowed kindly to the shape of the man before him, and the sound of 30 breath mists, and the particular weight of his own axe. The Holdsman rose. Val did not. Her eyes stayed on Tormund's mouth. The Magnar's hand drifted to his iron knife, like a mountain remembering that it had teeth. "I've heard of you," Tormund said, voice easy as a man in his own hall calling for beer. "You're the one who only raids when the wind is at your back and children are at your front." Rolf grinned a black grin. "Call me coward," he said, "and I will call you Southron." "I'll call you waste," Tormund said. "You have meat on you, and it's gone to maggots. I have a fire. Look at it. It can burn a man's house, and it can warm his child. It can cook a soup, and it can turn a man's face to a melted candle. You want fire to be only the one thing that kills." Rolf lifted his club, and everyone with him shifted forward, because they were made for shifting forward. Tormund could feel the camp's breath catch like a horse stuttering at a jump. He hated that feeling in a camp. He stepped toward it. No trial, Val said behind him. And if a spear had a voice, it would be hers. No words. He has had his words. Give him the work he's asked for. A great quiet fell in the moment before force. It was the quiet inside the beast of snow he had dreamed about. It was not empty, that quiet. It was full of telling. Tormund swung his axe through it like a paddle through water, and moved his feet the way he had learned to move them on ice that cracked. He went in not with a bellow, but with a laugh, because he had lived long enough to know what that did to a man who came at him with hate. Rolf's club came down and the iron scraps shouted when they met the axe's edge. The wood held. The iron did not. Bits flew. A tooth from Rolf's necklace snapped and fell into the snow like a small white lie exposed. Come on then, Tormund said, not hating him, not loving him, not thinking of anything beyond the way his breath moved in and out, and the way his boots held. Come on, boy. Show me how free you are. Rolf roared and came again and again. Tormund let him. He let him spend himself as young men do when they find out that the world isn't just a wall to bounce off but a hand to catch and twist. In the third pass, Tormund's heel found the deep of a print left by a then that morning. He put his weight in it without looking. The axe had glanced off the club's iron with a sound that vibrated in his nose, and he felt it down his spine. He turned that vibration into a step forward and hit Rolf not with the blade, but with the beard of the axe. A short, ugly kiss above the man's ear. Men fall in different ways. Rolf fell like a tree, all at once, and with the ground's acceptance. He did not move. Bind him, Tormund said to the holdsman, his voice steady as if he were talking about soup again. Bind those who came to break this fire's back, and bring them to the ring. He walked away before Rolf's men had been pinned. He did not look at the blood because there was too little of it to be interesting, and too much of it to be loved. He sat at the chalkstone where the line had bent, and put his hand over it like a man feeling a child kick in a belly. At the ring they set Rolf on his knees because he would not stand. When he woke, he spat red. His eyes went left and right like a dog on a too short leash. He laughed then, sudden and sharp, because he saw that he was not dead, and he had imagined that the first thing the new law would do was kill him. He was not wrong to imagine. He was not right. Tormund squatted with the old complaint in his knees and looked Rolf in the face. You can go south, he said. You can take the 30 who came with you. You can raid merchants who have no wolves on their banners and learn the words that go with a noose. You can run, or you can stay. If you stay, you work. You will pull sledges until your hands blister, and you will build walls for a people you tried to undo. You will burn the corpses of those who die because that smoke will wash some of the stink from you. You will not carry a weapon for a year and a day. If you pick up a knife to cut meat, a holdsman will hold your wrist. If you stay, and you fail this, I will kill you with my own hands while a child watches so he knows what happens to men who choose badly. Mendemtrau. Rolf spat again. It hung from his lip and froze on his beard. What do I get? He asked then, a whisper cut with incredulity. You get to live, Tormund said. You get to learn a better story to tell with that nasty mouth. He leaned in so his breath warmed the man's face. You won't wear my crown, but you might wear a hat that keeps the cold out and hear your own name spoken without men looking around to see where the knife is. Rolf stared at him because there were not any words in the part of his head that had lived on hate for a decade. The holdsman waited. The camp did not breathe. Then, slowly, Rolf's neck went slack and his eyes slid away from Tormund's without courage and without cowardice. He said nothing, which was a kind of yes that meant he did not trust his own voice not to make him a liar. Tormund stood. Bind him to the work, he told the holdsman. Bind the 30. The first who runs, kill. The second who runs, cut a finger. The third who runs, make him watch while we feed his meat to dogs that don't like the taste of man. Val came to his side when the ring broke apart. You were kind, she said, which from her mouth carried no praise and all prudence. I was cold, he said. Kindness sits well in the cold. It wears better than grief. Da. Your kingdom will be built out of men like him. she said, nodding toward Rolf. "And women like that one who shouted at you because her sister died. That's the only sort worth building out of," he said. "I don't know where you'd get any others." He slept badly that night from the ache of his blow, and because his head was full of new walls. He dreamed that he sat under the weirwood again, and that the carved mouth moved a little at last. In the dream, the tree did not give him advice. No tree that knew anything did, but it made a small sound deep in the bowl, like sap thawing. He woke with the sound in his ears and went out to piss under the old stars. The sky was shot through with green fires, cold and beautiful, and he felt very small and thick and human beneath it, and very content with the smallness. In the days that followed, the true north did not fix itself into something perfect. Perfect was a Southron word, suspicious as perfume. The true north shaped itself like ice in a mold you held in your hands. Slowly, stubbornly, to the warmth of skin, if you had patience. Men came and went. Banners tore and were mended. Laws were argued. The first child born under the compact came bloody and furious into a tent near the fist, while a walrus man and a then held the mother's legs, and a spearwife with broth on her breath whispered a story about a bear and spring to her. They named the child Bran for a bird that never touched the ground, and then changed their minds and named him Snow in a fit of laughter, and then changed back because names mattered and laughter mattered more. Sigrun cut meat with his new knife and did not cut his fingers. He stood at the hammerer's elbow and said, "I can learn that," and the hammerer said, "Then do," and he did. Rolf Harfang carried wood until his back bent in a way it never had before. He stacked it neat and straight the way a man arranges his sins so he will know which one to confess when the cold asks. He spoke less. When he laughed, once, men turned to look to see who had made him laugh, and if that someone had a knife. A she-bear came down from the hills thin as ribs, mean with hunger, and her eyes like cracked ice. She walked into a camp at dusk, and everyone froze. Tormund went out to her with his hands empty and his mouth full of foolishness. He sang a song about berries and shit. He told her she was a fine woman with a better arse than any in the Hall of 100 Fires. She roared in his face and he roared back because he did not know another sensible thing to do. Val's spear was behind him without his asking for it. The bear turned away because sometimes the gods look down and decide a joke has been told well enough. He stroked his beard afterward and said to the children, "There's your queen. She didn't want the crown either. She only wanted to eat." And the children laughed until the cold knocked their laughter back into them. Word came from Winterfell like a parcel that had traveled in many hands. The compact was set on stone in the godswood, and men who loved scratching had scratched it fair. Those who did not love scratching had mocked them for it and had stayed to listen anyway. Sansa Stark sent more than words. She sent a mason with hands like blocks, and a woman who knew how to build a wall of snow that wouldn't fall when the wind leaned. She sent a man with a crooked back, who could listen to two men argue and tell you what each had said under his words. She sent a boy with a harp and a scared face and a brave mouth and instructions to learn enough northern songs that an old man could die to them without feeling cheated. She sent a chest with salt and small glass beads because someone had told her that the free folk liked beads, and because she had liked beads once herself when she had been poor in ways that did not show. Davos came back too, with hands that did not know where to put themselves when men praised him. He sat with Tormund and Val with a cup steaming and said, "My lady wants to come north of the wall when the river thaws. She wants to bring a girl with her who remembers the faces of men she killed and won't let that memory sour. She wants to put her hand on your stone and feel the weight of what we've done, because she does not trust the taste of her own words until she has put her teeth in them." "Namdar." "Let her come," Tormund said. "Let her see what you made me do, Onion." "I only pointed at the door," Davos said. "You walk through." "You're good at pointing," Tormund said. "I'm a man who needs pointing. I tend to go where the soup smells best." "Now." He looked north then, to where the snow stretched white and indifferent, and saw, in his mind's eye, not the white emptiness of old, but 100 small fires, a dozen walls, 3 banners set together, a wolf's, a hand in red, a tusk skull, a line on a chalk stone that was not a fence so much as a memory. He thought of the tree with the amused face. He thought of the beast of snow with fires inside it, and the slow, strong beat that moved through the thing like a drum in a long night. He thought of the day when a southern king would look at his north and his true north, and find in both something that did not bend and did not break. And he laughed in the cold air, which turned his laughter to a white cloud and carried it away on the wind. He had decided to speak louder then, when needed. He stood from the fire. His knees were not as quick as they had been. He did not mind. The camp was a low, patient murmur, not the scared chatter of men waiting for death. Somewhere, someone had started a song with a silly chorus and a deep, good heart. He took up his axe not because he needed it, but because it felt right in his hand, a part of his shape. Val touched the back of his arm in that way that was less a touch than a knowledge. "Come on then," he said to no one and to everyone. "Let's see what needs doing." Snow blew across the ring in little snakes. The wind leaned and then relented. The fist stood black against the white, old and knowing. The day opened like a door. Tormund Giantsbane walked into it. He walked as a man who had built himself into a bridge and found that it could bear weight. He walked as a man with a people behind him who did not kneel and who did not need to, not for this. He walked as a man hearing a kingdom being born, not with trumpets or with screams, but with the steady work of hands and with laughter that belonged to children who were not afraid of the light. Okay. The days lengthened by the width of a finger laid over the sun. No more, no less. That was how you noticed it here. By chores that were done in a hair more light. By how far a man could see the color of his dog's eyes at dusk. By the way smoke took longer to lose itself. In that narrow mercy, the camp at the fist settled its weight on the land and became not a line of people waiting to die, but a place where they might live. They built windbreaks that did not look like walls to men who hated walls. They were ribs of snow and branches and packed drift. They went up in curves like the inside of a whale's chest. Children played between their arcs and learned the trick of listening for the high, thin whine the wind made when it scoured a place too clean. That sound meant step away or the drift would knife you. They built a long cookfire that never went entirely out, not even when the night made the coals look like sleeping eyes. They dug long pits, not graves, lined with stones, where they stored the meat and fish and root knots every caravan brought, packed in snow and sawdust like secrets. They set a circle of stones smooth enough for a man to sit without losing the feeling in his arse. Some days those stones were a thing, and some days they were a place to tell jokes until the smoke laid its black on your beard. Tormund moved through it like a man turning a meat on a spit. One shoulder to the heat, then the other, making sure everything had a chance at the flame. He had a way of seeing the work that needed doing, as if it were a set of hooks in the air. He pulled at this one, then that one, until the sag went out of the day. He was not a neat man. He tracked ash everywhere. He left his gloves where they would be stolen and then returned, because the thief knew he would need them. He forgot to eat until Val put a bowl in his hand, and then remembered so hard he finished hers too, and laughed when she showed him her teeth. Sigrun worked until his hands were a poem in scabs. He learned how much iron liked to be moved at once, and how much it liked to be moved slow. He stopped scraping a blade thin, and started letting the bar take shape under the hammer like a fish growing fat for winter. He watched the hammerer's face as much as he watched the iron. "You listen with your eyes, boy," the hammerer told him. "That's more than some men do with their ears." Rolf Harfang woke sore every morning and went to bed sore every night. A holdsman who had the patience of a stone and the humor of a wet boot kept pace beside him, counting quietly every time Rolf's hands slackened and the bundle of wood slid. When a driftwood man called him a dog, Rolf did not answer. When a boy spat at his boots, the holdsman caught the spit in his palm and wiped it on his own shirt. "You'll collect enough insult to build a hut," the holdsman told Rolf, not unkindly. "If you're clever, you'll put a fire in it." The first skirmish came the way skirmishes always come. Out of nothing, like a splinter under the skin. A yo of Northman trappers came up to the trade hollow with pelts stiff as boards and eyes red from the cold. They had the right mark on their pole, a scrap of linen with a wolf's head tied clumsy, and they came right and slow. At the bend of the river, The ice had opened a black mouth under snow, the kind you only saw from the side your luck allowed. The last man fell in without a sound, and the one in front heard it, and turned, and saw nothing but a slimming hoop of snow where a man had been. He shouted, and the driftwood men on watch did what watchmen do when someone shouts. They showed their teeth and their spears. It would have gone to blood if Asha Quickfoot had not run light as her name and thrown a coil of rope, with the love of a thief, for a clean throw. The rope caught the trapper under his arms. 2 more lines found his elbows. He came up in a wash of gray water and a curse. The watchmen lowered their spears by degrees, like stubborn men lowering their pride. The trappers came in shaking and alive, and were given broth. The man who had fallen through the ice said, "You saved me," with more suspicion than gratitude, because his mouth did not know the feel of that word in this place. The driftwood watchman said, "Of course," with the certainty of someone who knew which way was down. Tormund made them all sit with their bowls around the slow fire and tell the story in the way that made everyone look foolish, because that was the way a story did its work best. They ate and talked and laughed in the spots where the laugh went. When the laugh did not go, they sat with that, too, until the stew cooled on their spoons. Afterward, the trappers took iron bars and salt and a coil of rope finer than the one that had saved the man's life, and paid for them with pelts and the promise that in 1 month's time, they would come with dried venison. "Tell your lord," Tormund said at parting, and the man frowned. "Tell your lady," he corrected, and the man nodded, because even in the deep of the Barrowlands the tale of the Winter Lady had gone into the marrow of men's certainty. "Tell her the ice here eats men fairly, north or south." When the first raven flapped down from Eastwatch with its legs stiff as twigs, Ed Tollett took it from the boy who had the enviable job of feeling useful and unread. Ed sighed and stroked the bird's dingy feathers. "I know," he told it, with the sympathy of one tired creature for another. "They make you fly in this, and then they wonder why letters are damp." He unwound the damp strip and read it to himself, and then to Tormund and Val and the Magnar. 4 bodies rose at the broken jetty when the cold snapped last night, he said. "We burned them. 2 more in the morning, out of the strand, the kind that looks like a man sleeping drunk, and then puts fingers around your throat because someone can't be arsed to learn the old rules in the right order. We burned them. We could use oil. We could use hands." "Oil and hands," said Tormund. "We'll bring both." Val stood and was already naming names with her chin. "Not Sigrun," she said when he made a noise. A boy's eager scrape. "You've got work here. The dead won't stop moving because you poke at them. Iron will wait until you shape it and be grateful for the attention. Let the boy come see what he makes iron for," Tormund said. But his voice held the agreement that underlay his contrary words. They went to Eastwatch with a line of sledges that made the ice creak under pride. The wall to the west was a long blue bruise under the cloud. The sea to the east was a flat of hammered iron with white scurf, where it hissed against itself. Eastwatch under frost looked like a man who had fallen asleep with his eyes open. The gate to the sea roused when the horn blew, and the watchman on the wall, wrapped to the eyes and hating every last minute of being alive and cold, looked down with the dull ferocity that kept men like them breathing. Ed met them in the yard with his shoulders pulled up against the cold as if apologizing for it. "If it isn't my favorite person who tries to make me feel better about being alive," he said to Tormund. "And Val, who is possibly my favorite person who would kill me for saying so. And a mountain that has learned letters. Good. Come watch with me while the sea tries to remember the old songs." They carried oil to the broken jetty. They carried long hooks and poles with wire baskets on the ends, and a spear with a head like a shovel for scraping the top layer of ice off what needed burning. They carried torches wrapped in oiled rag. It was a neat, ugly business they did there. Walking the line where the old dead lay, and watching for a twitch under the ice, a half-remembered hand in the slush, the way a shadow moved when the wind had no right to be making it. When they saw it, they did not say prayers. They did not call out names. They stabbed and hooked and levered the thing onto the plank Tormund had carried on his shoulder because he liked the weight of a plan. They laid it down and poured oil and set it alight. The dead made no sound. The fire made all it needed to. The smell was what it was. Behind them, a girl stood with her hands under her armpits. She wore plain gray wool and leather, and no color to show what her blood was, and she watched the ice the way a cat watches not a mouse, but what the mouse thinks, which is a greater skill. When Tormund came back along the line with a burned shoulder on his tunic, where the wind had thrown a tongue of flame into his arm, she said, "You must be Tormund, and you must be the wolf with the silent step," he said, pleased and not surprised. "The sister with the knives." "I don't need the knives for this," Arya Stark said, "but they feel bad if I leave them alone." "You feed them?" he asked, teasing the edge of something he did not understand and so did not push. "They feed themselves," she said. Her eyes went to the place where the torches moved as if marking points on a map. "Dot," Sansa said, "to keep my feet under me and see what men look like when the old ghosts shake themselves out of the ground." She said words tell a thing one way, and the smell of burning tells it better. She told me to come home with sea on my boots and the sweet leaf taste of oil smoke in my mouth. And then she would ask me questions, and I would answer without lies. "Mensauer." "You will," Tormund said. "I don't think your mouth lies, and I don't think your eyes have the habit of it." "My mouth lies when I tell stories," Arya said with a flash of teeth. "But then I stop." They stood together and watched the sea fail to take back what the fire had decided for it. The men of the watch moved with the careful economy of people who knew that every wasted motion was a debt their blood would be asked to pay. Free folk with fishbone charms and ugly mittens moved beside them with their own thrift. Ed went along, his mutter-like prayer if prayer were honest. There were not enough blankets, and somebody would use one as a pillow if he had anything to say about it. And he never had anything to say about it, and yet here he was saying it again. Tormund took the mutter as a chant. You took comfort where it came or you did not get it. When the work was done enough for the day, when the wind sharpened and cut the skin where it wasn't covered, when the oil was low and the men's arms were beginning to move in dumb memory, instead of quick thought, Ed said, "Well, do the rest in the morning and it can save it for the sun. If the sea has an argument, it can save it for the sun." He looked at Arya without moving his head. "If you came to tell me I should sleep, I agree. I also want. You're better at not sleeping than I am," she said. "Sansa sent cheese. It smells like a troll's armpit. You'll like it." "I will pretend to," Ed said gravely. "It will keep us from being murdered by the taste of everything else we have." They ate at a long trestle in a hall that remembered better days and had set about not minding the lack. Arya sat and spoke little. When she did speak, it was to ask a question that made the men around her stop pretending they understood something and learn it properly. She asked Tormund about the thing. Who spoke first and why? Where the children sat? How a woman without a brother was heard? What men laughed at and what they could not? He told her that he liked a thing where a liar could tell a good lie and be applauded for it, and then caught by a better truth afterward, because that way, the truth had to be worth hearing. He told her that the children sat wherever their mothers wanted them to, and went where they pleased, and everyone minded where they put their feet. He told her that the rule about burning the dead was a law because the old law had been learned with too much blood to be forgotten. He told her about Rolf, and how a man's back could be a ledger. She listened the way he had seen wolves, listened to a man's breathing at night. "Good," she said at last, which was the sort of praise men learned to prize in Winterfell's new hall. "Then when some Lord South says this thing is just raiding in a chair, I will tell him it's raiding with its hands open." "Open hands can slap," Tormund said, pleased at the shape of that. "They can also bake," Arya said, and gave him a quick grin. A flash, there and gone. The compact made a second marking that week in Eastwatch's yard. Not with blood this time, but with a post cut from a tree that had grown with its roots in stone. They peeled it to a pale tightness, and Val traced the shape of a hand on it with red ochre and a bone pin. Sansa's men set the wolf above the hand, because they understood that marks comfort men who must go out in the morning and tell other men what their duty tastes like. Ed nailed a strip of iron into the wood at the height of a child's eye. "There," he said to Tormund, "so they can see themselves in the shine and feel like the world has a smooth place in it." "You've a poet's mouth for a miserable bugger," Tormund said. "I am what the gods made me and what the wall didn't have the heart to kill," Ed said. "Now kindly leave me to my suffering. You have a kingdom to birth." They went back to the fist with oilskins emptied and rope coils ragged, and the satisfying ache of having done something that mattered. On the second day of the return, the wind dove and came up again with teeth in it. They sheeted their sledges with hides and kept their eyes on the ground right in front of their feet, where the world made sense. Near the Milkwater's bend, Val stopped with a hand raised, and everyone behind her stopped because they had learned to trust a hand when it was hers. There were tracks in the snow that were not human and not wolf. Deep, round, heavy, wide as a man's thigh. They ran from the ice to the line of pines and then went south, which was the wrong direction for any of the old things to be going if they wanted to keep their skin. Tormund lowered himself beside one and put his hand into it. The snow burned and then numbed. He did not have to tell anyone to load their spears. The air did that for him. "Bear," Val said, though they both knew what her mouth was making room for even if it didn't want to yet. "Big. Hungry. Or a mother with milk," Tormund said. He did not smile. They followed the line with the caution of men who know the difference between bold and stupid. The trail veered toward a low fold in the land, where rock shouldered up through snow. The pines there thinned and spread. The world smelled different, musk and rot, and something like fish. In the lee of a stone they found the den, half sheltered by a fallen trunk. Steam drifted from it. The tracks went in. None came out. Tormund crouched and squinted into the hole. The dark inside was thick as boiled leather. He did not like the way his eyes wanted to make shapes. He remembered the bear at the camp, thin and angry. He did not like that memory either, but it made him laugh under his breath, which steadied him. He nudged the lip of the den with the axe's butt. A sound came out that was nothing like a bear's cough. It was a wet, human sound dragged too long through cold. It had the tone of old command trapped in a throat that didn't know how to be warm. Behind him, someone breathed a curse with a prayer tucked inside it. Val's spear slid into his line of sight like a thought he was about to have. "Back," he said softly. "We burn it from outside. No showing off." They gathered brush as if they were making a cook fire. They piled it at the den's mouth. They poured oil into it the way men do when they have learned never to be stingy with this particular thing. They touched it with a shy flame, which took to the oil like old lovers. The fire went in. The first scream was not a sound a man should be able to make. The second was closer to a voice. Tormund put his hand on the axe and not on his ear. He watched the dark get bright, then gray, then red. When the collapse came, it blew hot, and ash moved over the snow like a small dirty storm. He stepped back and held his breath until his eyes watered. When it was done, Val said, "There might have been a cub. There might have," he said. He had seen what he had seen. An arm that had been a man's once, with old leather wrapped around it, and the metal of a bracer that had not rusted the way it should. Fingers had moved. A man living inside an animal. No, an animal living inside a man. It was not a thing he would tell at fires. He said, "If there was, it died first, because there's at least one mercy in this world." They moved on with their mouths shut, and the smell of ash pinned to the back of their tongues like sullen pins. When they reached the fist and told the tale, the camp listened with fists clenched in lap or skirt and faces, set the way people set a pot on the edge of a fire to keep it from boiling over. Then they made it into what it needed to be. Another verse in the song of why they burned, and why they would keep burning until no old ghost could stick its fingers in their soup again. They named the line of beacon fires across the heart of the true north the Sky Road. It had another name in then speech that meant something like Teeth of Night, and the driftwood men called it the Chain, because they loved that they had taken chain and turned it into a thing they could walk beside with their heads up. The road was not one line but many. Small piles of stone cushioned in snow, each with a bowl carved into the top where oil would sit and wick, and near it a cash box with a seal on its lid, and a note laying out the law of it in 3 tongues. The law said, "This fire is for all who walk, and this fire will be lit at sunset on the first day of the week. And if you take the oil on another day, you put meat in the box, and if you take it without meat, you leave something else that matters. If a man took and left nothing, his name would find its way into a holdsman's ear, and the next time he tried to trade, hands would be slow to hold out to him. They set them from the milkwater down to the low white tangle near Hardhome, which men did not like to speak of, and west to places where the mountain's bones showed through the snow like ribs. The sky road's light did not make the night go away. It made it less alone. On the first night they lit them all, under a clear sky shot through with green fire. The camp at the Fist went quiet with the hush that comes when men know they have done a thing right, and do not want to frighten it away. "Listen," Val said in Tormund's ear. He did. He heard nothing. That was the point. The wind had lost a note. It made him want to cry and punch someone, and drink until his nose went numb. He did none of those. He held his breath and put his hand on the stone where the chalk line had been rubbed smooth by many hands. Messengers came and went like birds that belonged to no house. Some wore the night's watch black, and some wore no color at all. Some of Sansa's men learned how to tie a message to a seal and ask the animal to remember it. Some of Tormund's men learned how to fold a mark into wax so a maester could not say he hadn't seen it. They invented things and did not call it invention, because they did not trust the word. Ed Tollett learned to ride a little, badly, and complained about it very prettily. The Magnar of then showed a woman from the marsh how to march men across a crust without breaking it. She showed him how to hear water underneath with a stick and be certain. Sigrun learned to count without pebbles. Davos took off his glove in the cold to show a holdsman how to mark his knots so they did not slip when blood slicked the rope. Arya walked the sky road alone at night for the pleasure of seeing what was watching her. The wolves watched her. So did the walrus men sometimes. She waved at them both the same way. The first real trouble with the Barrowlands did not come from hunger or pride, or some old lord with a story that needed listeners. It came from a boy who had learned from his father that a free folk child was a thing a man could take and make a servant of if the mother's hands were busy. The boy was 15 and soft in the mouth, and mean in the heart, in the way of men who have not yet been asked to do anything hard on purpose. He took a girl at Eastwatch's market day. A pretty slip with amber beads and the straight stride of someone who knew where her feet wanted to go. He took her by the hair and said the words his father had told him would make it right. And she looked at him as if looking would be enough to break his fingers. When it was not, she bit him and screamed. Everything that happened after that happened because of the compact. A walrus man grabbed the boy's wrist. A Northman dropped fish and raised his hand. A holdsman walked through the press and collected both the boy and the girl. And the fish were stepped on, and the screams stopped because the law had arrived, not because the stronger hand decided it was tired. Ed Tollett presided in the yard because he had the right to undo the marks, and the mason who had learned to be a judge in another life stood with him. And a woman whose baby had just cut a tooth held the girl on her hip. The boy shook with his own fear, and with the bright, brittle anger of someone who had never been told no by any mouth he wanted to hear yes from. He said words that had sounded like iron when his father said them. They sounded like reeds here. He thought words were meat, Val said to Tormund afterward. Under the eaves where the icicles spoke their one song in 100 voices. He thought if he said them loud enough, his mouth would not be hungry anymore. He'll learn. He will, Tormund said grimly. The boy had been sent back to Winterfell with a mark on his wrist and one on his cheek that would last longer. He would stand in Sansa's hall and try those words in her air and see what they weighed. The girl had been walked back through Eastwatch by 3 women who each had something in their faces that told you they had eaten worse than this and lived. His father will learn too, he added. And in that, there was less mercy. When Sansa came north of the wall for the first time, spring was a story the South told and the true North believed out of habit. Like an old lie you keep, because it makes a good song. She came on a day when the wind had put away some of its knives. She wore furs that had somehow been taught to be courtly. The men who came with her looked everywhere and kept their hands open where the free folk could see them. Arya had gone to meet her and walked a pace behind, the way a sister does when she wants her sister to shine and does not intend to make a habit of it. She stood with Tormund under the Fist, and watched the camp do what it did: hammer, smoke, swear, laugh, mend, teach, share, punish, forgive. Sometimes slowly, she stood and watched the Sky Road's bowl be filled for the evening, and she closed her eyes and looked into the distance with something like grief and something like relief. She asked to see the knife boy whose hand had found the hammer. She asked to see the man who had carried wood with a holdsman breathing down his neck. She asked to see the woman who had shouted at Tormund because her sister had died, and then taken a place at the thing beside the Magnar. She did not ask to see the worst of it because she did not need to. It was in the air and in the set of men's jaws. She ate soup that had more fish than water and smiled at it without showing her teeth. At night they sat near the long fire, and men and women sang in voices that had not learned to make pretty for company. Sansa did not sing. She listened. When the song turned to something old and low and made for the hard work of staying alive, she pressed her hands together where her lap made a shelf and did not move until the last note had tried to hold the last bit of breath and then let go. Arya stood with her arms across her chest and tapped a finger against her elbow in time, like a drummer, like someone ready to move. "You made this," Sansa said to Tormund when the fire had settled and the talk had thinned to murmur. "Not alone, but you made it." "I hit it with my head until it went the shape I wanted," he said, pleased at the picture. "You hit other people's heads too, when it was the shape that was needed," she said dryly. "And you laughed when you did it." "Only because they made me," he said. "You laugh or you freeze." She looked out at the dark. The Sky Road bowls had been lit, and the light sat in them like small, stubborn suns. "You want Hardhome," she said. It was not a question. "I want to stand in that place and have it not smell of the last time it burned," he said. "I want to put a banner there and have it mean that we chose this fire, not the one the old ghosts chose. I want boats to come there, little fat ones and longer mean ones, and tie up to a post with my mark and your mark, and go away lighter and heavier both. I want to see a child there who never knew the look of a mother counting which of her children would be allowed to keep breathing. That's what I want." "It will be ugly," Sansa said. "And there are men who will say it stains the North to look that way, even if it gets them what they ask the gods for every night." "Ugly is honest," Tormund said. "Pretty is what you do to make a court feel clever." She laughed, and it was a bright thing that cracked her calm and let something fierce show for a breath. "I have been pretty," she said. "I have no wish to be again." They went to Hardhome at the end of a week, where the wind pretended to be a friend and then bit them anyway, for old time's sake. They went by sled on the shore where the sea heaved under its skin, and by boats where the floes made lanes like alleyways in a bad city. The driftwood men smelled like they wanted to fight the sea for the joy of it. The Vens looked at the water and thought about marching across it. Arya stood in the prow of a small boat and leaned on the rope, as if it were a horse's neck. Davos watched with his old quiet smile. Ed Tollett did not enjoy any of it and told everyone so. Hardhome came up out of the world like a rotted tooth. The old jetty was black and broken. The huts were skeletons of themselves. The wind brought smells up from the ground where they had no business being. Men who had never been here before shut their mouths around curses. Men who had been here and lived breathed differently, as if not to wake anything. Tormund stepped ashore and put his hand on the old post where a rope had been tied and burned and tied again. He set a new rope around it that had been braided by a child with brown fingers and an intent mouth. He took from Sansa a strip of dyed linen with a wolf and a hand painted on it. The paint scoured to a softness by many thumbs. He tied it where it could flap with the wind's song. Val set a bowl on a stone and poured oil into it, and a bit of salt, and a sprig of something that had been green once. She lit it, and the fire took without fuss. They did not look for bones. They were there. The land was lousy with them, and the sea kept trying to spit the rest out. They did not make a show of burning what they found. They burned it because it needed doing. They did not say the names of men none of them had known. They said, "Stand back, and more oil, and hold his legs, and give me your scarf. I don't care if you like it," and there, and there, and there, until the work had the shape of something that had been done right. The driftwood men sang their net songs to keep the tempo. The Thens counted in their heads. Ed Tollett muttered until he laughed at something he said, and the laugh made everyone else roll their eyes and try not to smile. When the day bent toward its places and the bowls along the shore glowed. When the village that had stopped being a village had a shape again. When Sansa stood where once a woman had made a choice between a cliff and a fire, and chose both. Tormund said the words he had brought, and had not told anyone he had brought. By bone and fire, he said, the way he had at the compact, and he put his hand on the post. By ash and salt, he added, because the sea had a right to be invoked too. By the laugh of children who will not run from this place because they have learned it is for the living. Sansa stood beside him and said, by snow and stone, and her hand was cool and sure. By bread and broth, she added, because she always remembered the inside of things. They did not cheer. They set to building. The first post for the new jetty went down as the first night filled in around them. The driftwood men argued about how a ringbolt should be sunk into a post that wanted to spit anything that felt like iron. Harigda then lit a bowl and set it on the end of the beam, and made his men march the last length with their bare hands on the wood, so they would remember the shape of it. Arya lay on her belly at the lip of the jetty and watched the black water move, in case it remembered any faces. Davos sat and told a boy with a harp when to change a note. The next day, a barge came from the south loaded with salt and cloth and rope, and a barrel of something that wanted to be wine when it grew up. The boy who leaped to the post with a line in his hand had copper hair and a grin with half its teeth. He slipped because men like him do not know when to slow down, and his feet went out from under him, and the line went with him. A walrus man grabbed it, and then adjusted his hands, and they hauled the boy back onto the wood with such speed, the boy laughed all the way, and then coughed seawater and laughed again when he could breathe. It was a good augury, if you were the sort of fool who loved auguries. Tormund was that sort, and would admit it. They held the first joint thing there 2 weeks later. Free folk and Northmen, Holdsman and Davos, and a woman from White Harbor who had a crier's voice and a merchant's eyes. The questions were ugly and beautiful, the way honest questions are. How many days could a man keep a net in the water under the wolf's banner and not pay the duty? If a free folk woman married a Northman under the compact, could her children choose their name without getting stared at in a hall? Who had to pay when a Then who had never put a foot on a boat in his life broke a man's oar with his thick skull? Because the oar had been in the wrong place. What weird geld would satisfy a mother whose son had been pressed into a ship's crew as a joke that was not one? Sansa listened. Tormund spoke when the silence meant men were getting ready to do something stupid. The Magnar said, "The law is a wall you build from the inside." The woman from White Harbor wrote down the agreements with her neat hand on a skin she had paid for with scorn. Davos paced and smiled when men called him onion and meant it fondly. There was a moment when the sky turned yellow above the sea, and a gust from the north carried a smell like old bones shaken out over sun. As one, men looked up. That was how you knew the true north had put its hand around a thing. When men looked up together and did not reach for their knives because they trusted that if there was something to cut, they would be told when it was time. In the true north, they made a new feast out of an old fear. On the last night before the sun began its slow return in earnest, not by a calendar on a maester's board, but by the feel of light on the face, they lit every bowl on the Sky Road at the same breath. You knew it was time when you tasted the smoke from east and west at once, and the wind carried laughter. They called it first smoke. They cooked meat without worrying about whether there would be enough tomorrow. They told stories they did not tell other nights, the ones that did not have a hero who shook off snow and death and made it home to the same bed that had warmed him before. On first smoke, the heroes did not make it home, but their children did, and someone had put a blanket on the bed and warmed a stone for the foot of it. Tormund sat with Val and Sigrun and the Holdsman on that night and let the smoke soak him until he felt like a piece of salmon hung on a rack. He watched the bowls flame all along the ridge. He counted them because counting made men feel bigger than their deaths. He told Sigrun a story about a winter when his beard had frozen to his shirt and he had torn half of it out when he laughed because a woman had said something cruel and perfect about his arse. Sigrun laughed and did not hide it. Rolf Harfang sat 3 fires away with a bowl in his rough hands. He drank and did not get drunk. That was work too. The Magnar talked to a walrus man with his knife in his lap and his hands open. Later, when the fires slid toward coals and children slept in awkward piles, Sansa came to sit. She had walked hard home all day and all the wretched days it still contained. She was pale with the thinking she had done. Arya sat on her heels with a stick, drawing a map in ash and ruining it again and again, because maps were best when they could not be kept. Davos had gone to sleep, sitting up with his head on his chest and his hand on the hilt of a knife he did not like to use. "Tomorrow," Sansa said in a voice that did not cut the air, "I go back. I will take what I have smelled into the hall. I will remind men who enjoy comfort that the world is more interesting than that. I will be told that I am making something new that will eat us later. I will say that all living things are born hungry. I will tell them to feed the right mouths. Then Shahar. Feed the children," Tormund said. "Fight the men. I seem to be making a habit of it," she said, and her mouth made a shape that had forgotten for a moment how to be iron. Arya drew a wolf and a hand in the ash with one stroke. She added a boat under it. "When boys in White Harbor paint this on their arms for luck, and their mothers don't scold them for it, then we will have done it," she said. "When boys north of the wall paint it and their mothers scold them because the paint will stain blankets and then show them a way to stain that washes out, we will have done it," Val said dryly. Tormund listened to the women he had put his faith in without making a speech about it. He stood and stretched, and every one of his joints told him a separate story. He went out from the fire toward the edge of the ring where the wind came up at him like a friend who was not embarrassed to be ugly. He walked until the voices went away. He stood in it and put his head back and let the cold lay its hand over his face. It felt like truth. He went to the weirwood the next day because he had started this thing by talking to a tree, and he liked a pattern once it began. He did not sneak up on it. He walked in loud, with his breath a saw and his boots a drum. The face on the tree did not smile for him. Good. He put his palm to the old bark, the way he had before, and felt the cold and the listening underneath it. "I made your face a liar," he told it, cheerful. "You look sad and sly. We made a place that's stubborn and loud. We made a crown out of smoke and jokes. We made a wall out of men who don't like walls. We told the South that we would stand beside them when they needed it, and no sooner. We told ourselves we would not eat our own children when the old dark knocks on the door and says there's no soup left. We burned what needed burning. We kissed what needed kissing. We hit what needed hitting. If you're angry about any of that, spit sap on my boots." And now, snow slid from a bough with the timing of a good comic. It thumped his head. He grinned at the face, brow ridged with rhyme. "I like you, pretty man. You understand me." Dow. He had left his axe leaning against a trunk. He took it up, because work waited, and made his way back toward the place where his people were making a sound that was not the sound of fear. He stopped only once, because the wind changed and brought with it a smell he had learned to take seriously. The smell of iron and old leather, and the faint, clean tang that came with men who walked in ranks even when they did not have to. He climbed a small rise and looked out. There was a line on the land where no natural line should be. It was the color of too many men together. They flew no banners, because men with that look did not care who knew them until it mattered. They were a day away, then less if they wanted to be. He stood very still. He felt the sky roads bowls in his mind the way a man feels his teeth when he runs his tongue along them. He thought of Sansa riding south. He thought of Arya's knives and of Davos with his careful words and Ed's mutter like a song. He thought of Harag and the walrus man, and the woman from the marsh with a baby on her hip, who had shouted and then learned to hold her voice. He thought of Rolf, whose first instinct would be to hit whatever was there first. He thought of Sigrun, whose new knife would be sharp and not throw a shadow long enough to frighten anyone. He thought of the boy with the rope at Hardhome who had laughed when he choked. He thought of the post where the wolf and the hand snapped together in the wind, stubborn, made of nothing important to a southerner. Linen, paint, fingers. He turned and shouted a word that brought Holdsman running. He pointed, and they did not argue with the way he pointed. Not because he was a king in the Southron way, but because he was a man who saw the hook in the air that needed pulling. "Southron," he said when they reached him and squinted where he squinted. "Too many for a caravan. Not enough for a war. Something in between. They think the line on the chalk is a mark they can rub out," Val said, appearing like a thought you wanted to keep. "They think the wolf's jaw is soft. They will find out it is a jaw that has learned to be gentle without forgetting its first lesson," Tormund said. He thumped the haft of his axe on the snow to wake up the echo. "Get the bowls filled on the ridge and lit. Send the walrus men to Hardhome to pull the boats under the jetty and turn them on their sides. Send the thence to the Milkwater to stand where the ice looks least friendly. Find Ed and tell him I need his misery in a line across the path. Send a boy to run down Sansa, but tell him not to die trying, because if she turns around wrong she'll have too much wine in her face." Val was already turning to do 5 of those things. "And you?" she said, not pausing. "I'll stand where they can see me and not do anything stupid," he said. "Which will be the hardest work I've done in a fortnight." He did stand where they could see him, on the little rise, with the wind combing his beard like a bad-tempered mother. Harad came to his right and planted his feet wide and his knife wider. Arya stood for a moment on his left, then vanished, as was her habit, leaving a sense that the air had become dangerous to anyone who did not know they were welcome in it. Ed came up with a line of black cloaks, who looked as if they had never expected to be asked to do anything important, and resented it, and were going to do it very well. The walrus men moved off like patient lumps toward the sea. The driftwood men put their hands on their nets and their oars with a proprietary worry. The bowls along the ridge flamed all at once because someone had told a story about how good it would look if they did, and then had gone and done the work to make it so. The line on the land came on. It resolved itself into men in leather and mail, with helmets that had the shape of men who wanted to be taller. Their faces had the earned arrogance of people who had marched through villages and learned that fear tasted like meat. They saw the fire and adjusted nothing. They saw Tormund, and some straightened because a story had walked out of someone's mouth and stood on the snow and grinned at them. They saw the way the then's feet were set and did not know what to make of men who stood like they were parts of a wall they had made themselves. They saw black cloaks and thought old thoughts. They saw wolves nowhere and decided that meant something soft. Their leader, if the term could be used for a man who looked everywhere and not once at the faces of the people he was about to meet, raised a hand and the line slowed and then stopped. He had the sort of mouth that made words into a command even when they were pleas. He rode a horse with good bones and a better attitude. He put the horse's head into the wind as if it would cow the wind. He was the sort of man the true North would have needed to hit when it was hungry. Tormund felt a friendly interest in his skull. "Who speaks?" the man called, as if calling across a hall for a servant. "I do," Tormund said. He did not put a title on it. He let the words find their own weight. "If you like pretty, I can piss you a crown. If you want law, I can put my hand on it." The man blinked, because that was not how Northmen talked to men who had polished their boots this morning. "You are wildlings." "We were," Tormund said amiably. "We are free folk. We are the true North. We are the people who will give you soup if you are polite, and a bruise if you are not. You?" The man's jaw worked. "We are men of House Riswell," he said finally, and looked as if that should have changed the air. "We come to find out whether the rumors are true, that a man north of the wall calls himself king and another calls herself queen, and both think the Stark will give them leave to do it." "The Stark gave us a compact," Tormund said. "We gave it back with our blood and our bone, and a mark on a stone a man your age can carry without complaining. The rumors you came to find out travel faster than you ride. No, we do not recognize a border drawn by We recognize obedience." "You have our obedience," Tormund said, and every man behind him froze. because they did not expect this and did not like the taste of it. He let them stay in that shock for the length of one breath. You have our obedience to the law we have with the Lady of Winterfell. If you carry her mark, you can speak where we speak and be heard as if your mouth were hers. If you carry only your own name, you can try. Menderau. The man smiled. I did not ride in the snow to ask leave, he said. I rode to say, it will stop. Then say it, Tormund said. Get the taste of it in your mouth. It will be good for you when it turns sour. The man's horse stamped. He calmed it with a slap. You will pull down these marks, he said, and gestured with his chin in the direction of the bowls that rimmed the hollow. You will stop this raiding in a chair. You will stop pretending the Starks are fools that can be led by the nose of a... He broke off on the word he could not say, because Arya had put herself in his horse's shadow and was smiling. Finish, she said, bright as a knife. We like it when men say exactly what they mean. It saves time. The man's mouth lost a little of its shape. He hesitated, because some old story had caught up with his eyes and told him what the shape of the she-wolf's face meant. He didn't know whether to lie or speak, and in the wobble, his men lost a bit of weight. Tormund took the wobble and made a seat of it. You came into a hall, he said. You do not like that it does not have a roof, you know. You brought your boots muddy and your manners cheap. You can wipe both or keep them as they are. If you wipe them, we give you food and talk about lines like men who mean to be alive next winter. If you keep them, we will look at the wolf's mark on your sleeve. If it is real, we will forgive the mud once. If it is not, we will take your boots off our feet and send you home barefoot so you learn the feel. He made his laugh small and not cruel. And if you would like a crown to look at while we talk, I still have the snow and the piss. The men behind the Risewell leader shifted and looked at one another, because some of them had mothers who would have laughed at that line in a kitchen and known that humor was how a man told you he had teeth. The leader glared because he could not afford to laugh here and did not know how to not do what he could not afford. He took a breath for a speech. He did not get the chance. A rider came in hard from the west, with his horse lathered, and the foam freezing in beads on the animal's beard. He yelled before he was close enough to be sure who he was shouting at, because fear made him impolite. Fire! On the sky road beyond the milkwater. Someone's put oil in the bowls where there was none and lit them in the wrong order. It's a lie light, meant to pull men off the crust where it'll give under, and there's a caravan with kids, and a woman with a babe, and... Save your breath, Val said sharply. Save your horse. She had already turned and was moving. Tormund looked at the Risewell leader and saw what he needed to see. The flinch that said he wasn't made of stone. The calculation that said he was still turning over his words and had not finished. Good. Leave a man with his mouth full of sentences, and he wouldn't be able to do anything sensible until he swallowed or spat. You, Tormund said, pointing at Harrog. You take the thens and cut the wrong lights. You know which bowls were full this morning. You, to the driftwood men, tow the sledges from the bad crust and make lines. Ed. Yes, Ed said, because he had already begun to move and his list of complaints about it would have to wait until later. I will come and be unhappy where it will do the most good. Reswell, Tormund said, turning back with the grin that had broken many foolish moods. You can watch a kingdom save its children and then go south and tell anyone who will listen it was a crime. Or you can put your men on the good crust and find out where you belong at a fire that wasn't yours and is now. Your choice. Either way, take off your spurs if you go on the crust, or your horse will teach you a lesson I don't have the time for. No answer. He did not wait to see which way the man's mouth chose. He ran, truly ran, like a younger man, his axe head bumping his shoulder and his breath a shovel. The sound of the false light carried thin and ugly across the flat. Men shouted in the way that meant they were trying not to. The bowls on the ridge flamed earnest and steady. An honest rode 2 fingers to the left of the lie's sparkle. Children's voices were a kind of light too. Tormund heard them and turned toward them without deciding to. The crust under him made the groaning song it makes when it means to give. He slowed and went flat to spread his weight because he was not too proud to remember what the land liked. Harrog's men moved like men who had learned to fight the ground first and then other men. They went for the false bowls and knocked them over and dumped their oil and stamped them, then stamped their feet to get feeling back. The driftwood men got their lines on the caravan and pulled with a patience that made a virtue of not panicking. They spoke to one another in the short words you use when you want your lungs for work, not for telling other men you are there. Ed Tollett came up like a small piece of the wall that had recently learned to walk. He put his boot where it would help, and his insult where it would be taken as fellowship. "I have hated many things," he said to a child he was passing like a sack from one good patch to another. "Today, I hate lying fires and my own knees." The caravan came across like a berth. At the end of it, a woman with a baby tied to her chest slipped, and the crust under her cracked and popped, and said a word that was the shape of the word no in every tongue. Tormund reached for her. His feet went into the slush to the ankle, and then to the calf. The cold bit, mean and ecstatic. He got his hand in the rope around her waist and pulled, and felt her weight come and go like a fish's. Someone else got the baby with a scoop that would leave a bruise Tormund would apologize for later and be forgiven for, because the alternative had been worse. They all fell forward in a heap that broke the crust a little more and then settled like a bad joke. When the last of them were across, Tormund lay on his back and looked at the sky. It was white and unhelpful. He laughed until the laugh pushed water out of his beard, and Ed said, "That sort of cheerfulness kills men," and then laughed too because he could not help himself. When Tormund stood, the Risewell men were there, breath smoking, cheeks red and abashed, hands full of rope and stupidity which they had, mostly, decided to set down. "We'll talk," Tormund said to their leader, because that was what men did when they had not just died. "We'll teach you the names of our bowls, and you'll teach us the names of your daughters, so we know who we're talking to when we tell you how foolish you look." It was as much forgiveness as a man like that could be given in a morning. It was more than he would be given in the afternoon if he stepped wrong. They built a cairn over the false bowls and left a joke on it in 3 tongues that said, "If you light these out of turn, the wind will see and tell your mother." It made men snort when they passed, and that snort made them look twice at which light they were following. Jokes were good law if you chose them right. The Risewell men stayed that night. They sat stiffer than free folk, because they were not comfortable in their skins. They ate soup and were not poisoned by it. They watched Val at the fire and did not speak to her, unless she spoke first, because their mothers had taught them not to pet wolves without being asked. They watched Arya go and come and stared at the way the space around her seemed owned. They watched Tormund and Harag argue about the right width of a sledge runner, and then laugh when the sledge moved true despite both of them being wrong. Some of them laughed too. Their leader did not. He went to sleep with the hardest pillow, the kind you cannot change: pride. In the morning, he asked to speak to Tormund in a voice that had learned something. "I came to say no," he said. "I am not sure what I will say now. My lord, my lady, will wish to speak. You will come to the rills." "I will," Tormund said. "I will bring fish. You will bring beer. We will teach your people what a bowl on a stone means, and they will teach mine why you name your sheep. We will tell one another lies until the truth can stand it." The man bowed with the gracelessness of someone who had learned late in life how to do it. He went. Tormund watched him and felt a satisfaction that did not need winning to taste sweet. So it went. They did not become something else overnight. They became more themselves with a better shape. They did not stop fighting. They chose the place to do it. They did not stop hating. They put the hate into work until it sweated out and made their hands useful. Sigrun cut a finger and did not curse because he had learned that men who made a fuss bled worse. Rolf Harfang woke with his hands on his chest and did not reach for a club for 3 breaths, and then 5, and then better. Harag walked a hard home and back, as if it were a drill carved into his bones. Arya taught 3 girls to throw a knife at a post, and then told them never to believe a man who smiled when he told them they were pretty with a knife in their hand. Davos took off his glove and put his fingers on the chalkstone, and smiled at how little you needed for a mark to last. On first smoke of the next year, the bowls lit and the sky took the light and bent it into a ribbon. Tormund stood with Val and with a child on his shoulder, the babe from the crust, now a small round tyrant who treated his beard like a ladder. He breathed the smell of oil and meat and ash and thought that kings in the south must dream often and badly about trumpets and swords and chairs, and he was glad for them if they liked it, and gladder for himself that his kingdom's sound was the slurp of soup, and the way a joke passed around a fire until it made itself alight. He thought of the tree again, because he always did, and wondered if somewhere in the wood, a face cut into white bark was learning to smile differently. He would not have said he was a happy man. Happiness was a picture people held up to each other to save time. He would have said he was a man whose life had a shape he could stand in without hunching, and that was enough. When the raven came at dusk with its feet iced and its message hard, he took it from Ed's hand and let the bird peck him, because the bird had earned that. He read the mark, and then he did not laugh. He looked at Val, and she did not ask before she put her thumb on the ink and smudged it like a seal. "Winterfell," he said. "Word from Davos. The men at the neck who take coin for a cause and then forget the cause when the coin has spent. They talk about closing the road. They talk about tolls. They talk about how the free folk are fatter than they have a right to be on meat the South might want. Then we will teach them what a toll is," Val said, and she was smiling, though not because she was amused. "We will charge for letting them live when their feet go out from under them. We will go south and be very polite," Tormund said, "because that was the more dangerous thing to do. We will bring jokes, and we will bring a bowl." He tucked the message into his belt and held the child's leg where it kicked his chest. He looked at the fire, and then at the dark beyond it. He felt the weight of a bridge in his bones again. He took a breath for it, and let it out slow. The wind carried it east along the sky road, west to the mountains, south to the Wolf's Hall, north to the sea. It came back to him with the taste of all of that. He took up his axe and went to find where the first step wanted to be.